Hello there, my favorite randos on the internet. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Let's Disagree and Other Interesting Conversations. You might recognize a familiar face here. My guest today is again Mike Fuller. Mike, how are you this morning?
Doing really good. It's nice. It's a nice Sunday morning. I've already enjoyed my second Saturday quite a bit.
Yeah.
Got the car fixed and mowed the lawn. So
Yeah. For those who are not aware, Mike and I had a great conversation a few weeks ago where we talked about his path from being a former full-time seminary teacher to now working in the field of therapy and specifically sex therapy. So at the end of that episode, we talked about the idea of today's episode, which is we are going to take a little peek into the LDS Sexuality Subreddit. And I felt like Mike is the perfect guest for this as someone who is both an expert in Mormonism from his time as a full-time seminary teacher, as well as now a sex therapist. Here's that thumbnail from our last conversation where we had a lot of fun talking about Mike's background. And also, Mike, I thought it was a really great conversation where you shared a lot of the acronyms around healthy sexual behaviors. I really liked you sharing with us the compass model of, principles of a healthy sexuality. Hopefully I'm remembering it correctly. Anything you want to add to that? Okay.
The question is,
great.
Can you remember what they are? But I won't ask you in front of everybody.
Oh, I remember C is consent.
That's most important.
Oh, I don't remember.
Openness for honesty.
Openness, mutual pleasure. Okay.
Protection and prevented from unwanted consequences. Right. A is autonomy, placeholder for not exploiting people through power, control, or dishonesty. And the two S's are shared values. Do you know yours and do you discuss them with your partners? And the last S is safety. So
that's right.
That's right. Yeah, I'm still a teacher, even though I'm I still teach.
Still a teacher, and I forgot the names, but I definitely remember the values and the principles, and I appreciate you sharing those with everybody. So today we're going to take a look at the LDS Sexuality Subreddit. For people who are not aware, the LDS Sexuality Subreddit is a place where mostly believing members, it seems like, go to ask questions about their sexual experiences or discuss sexual topics. There are occasionally, post-Mormons like us who might go there, and it's just kind of for me, it's just kind of an interesting insight into where believing members are at today with regard to sex. Because I think, to kind of spoil where we're going to go today, the point of today's episode is not to gawk or make fun of or mock these folks who are sharing some of these insights. It's really to kind of look at, in some ways, there are a lot of takes on this subreddit that were a lot more progressive than I assumed there would be. But Mike, I know you've had a chance to look at the different threads and comments that we're going to look at today. Do you have kind of a introduction to what we're going to see or your overall thoughts before we get going?
No, other than I don't do Reddit. Does that mean is it called Redditor? I might end up there from a search, but otherwise I don't spend a lot of time on Reddit.
That's probably
It was fun. There was some, there's some chuckles to it, but some understanding that these are common. It made sense to me is my take. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if your listeners, I don't know I don't know if your listeners are the ones that are on this subreddit. I don't think so, but they might have experienced something similar or still experiencing it, right? Just because we've left a religion or are nuanced in it doesn't mean that the religion doesn't still stay with us.
Exactly. That's well said, Mike. And that's exactly the reason I wanted to look at this is I know these are really common issues that crop up. Every time I'm at a post-Mormon event, whether it's, something like Thrive or Sunstone, there are always discussions about these same types of topics. Natasha, as we talked about last time, Natasha Helfer, she, every Sunstone has a great Q&A where she takes live questions from folks. And so I know that these are issues that the post-Mormon community still grapples with, or the nuanced believing Mormon community still grapple with. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to do today's episode. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. These are a few posts that I pulled from the LDS Sexuality subreddit over the last couple of days. And I'm going to serve as the voice for all these Redditors since Mike is not a Redditor, and then we'll get kind of Mike's reaction. So this post is titled, "Not Sure How to Open Her Up." which is a weird title to pick for an LDS sexuality subreddit, I will just say. My wife and I have had a lot of great sex over our 10-year marriage, but as time goes, it becomes less and less, and I feel less and less loved. She swears this isn't the case, but as I try to do things, all I hear is no. And then if she feels guilty, will tell me we can have sex on her terms. It's become very unexciting and feels like a chore that I have to work extremely hard for. I think this is due to being LDS and her, for some reason, feeling guilty to just have sex. Not sure where to go from here. So before we go to any comments or anything, Mike, do you have any reaction to that first post?
Just noticing that the word guilt is in there more than once.
Mm.
And that's a lot of experience. We've got this term called purity culture, right? And it's sort of a placeholder we use even within Mormonism. Really purity culture refers to this evangelical movement in the 1990s. I don't know if anybody's watched the show Shameless, right? The whole Jackson family is all about the purity culture, the effects of purity, right? This switch that says your value as a Christian is the barometer is your sexual behavior, has nothing to do with how you treat people, how much you follow Jesus, etc. In Mormonism, I'm of the opinion that we have what I actually refer to as chastity system. So they have this purity culture where it was a really big cultural movement sort of within the evangelical movement, sort of bottom up type things, or from leaders, but not necessarily this authoritative system. Here in Mormonism, we've always had it. Like, it's not a push from the 90s. This is the push from the 1800s saying that you're right. You should feel guilty to have sex. So that's what jumped out to me is this experiencing that these two people have. They're married. We'll make some assumptions that they're LDS, they're monogamous, they want to have sex with only each other.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them apparently feels guilty about it. The other one doesn't know what to do to experience non-guilty love with non-guilty sex with their partner. So that's what jumped out to me.
Yeah, let me ask you about a phrase the OP original poster used here. They say, if she feels guilty, she will tell me we can have sex on her terms. As a therapist, what does that phrase say to you? Because it's an interesting turn of phrase to me.
Yeah, if that was mentioned, for example, in my, I said, do you know what her terms are? What is that, right?
Mm.
We have maybe this is, I would definitely explore what that means. It's not likely that this couple has healthy sexual conversations.
Mm-hmm.
The conversations they have from this post, I have it on the right, appear to be both right out of frustration, out of discomfort. They're not able to have this conversation and say, hey, I would like to be closer to you. And part of that includes sex. I'm curious what other, right? We have all the more domains around intimacy than just sex, right? There's physical, emotional, mental, intellectual intimacy. I mean, has anybody, I'm wondering if this couple have ever said, I'd like to be more close to you intellectually. What does the rest of their picture look like? Those are big questions I have.
Yeah, I guess my other thought, and I obviously don't have the expertise you do, but I'm just struck by the tone of this post is coming from, like you said, a place of frustration. And I guess I'm just sitting here wondering for the wife that this partner is writing about. It's probably really difficult to feel sexy or sexually connected to someone if the word, like you said, the word guilt is used multiple times in this conversation. If it's clear that it's something that's causing pressure and anxiety in their marriage, I guess there's just a weird paradox there, right? Where it's like, I can understand being frustrated at being the higher desire partner, and feeling like you would like more frequency or more intimate sex. But I'm also struck by the fact that nothing is going to make someone feel less sexy than like pressure to perform, right?
And what does it look like? For him, it sounds like a no means rejection. Right. That I am rejected. That she swears this isn't the case, but I still try to do. I try to do all things I hear is no, and all I hear is a no. If all they're hearing is a no, I teach my clients how to give softer no's, how to be thankful for no's. All right. If consent is the first sexual health principle that, like we mentioned in that compass,
Mm-hmm.
this might be a consent issue. It might not. Might be a desire issue. Do these individuals? Do your listeners, are they familiar with the different types of desire? Typically, we have the two, and they're stereotypical spontaneous desire and responsive desire. That he's saying, hey, I'd like to have sex with you more often, and I'd explore with her, and partners can do this, listeners can do this. Hey, when we have sex, and you're not sure if you want to do it, do you enjoy it when we do?
Mm.
That's what I would explore with this individual. I think you did start us out with I'm going to say you tossed a softball on the first one.
Yeah, I did.
I am going to say that.
Here's a few comments from other folks on that subreddit. This person said, "You're not alone, friend. You're not alone. In marriage, we don't make people do things. They choose it for themselves. And that can be frustrating while they grow, develop, change, and while you do the same. Write a book when you have it figured out." So again, like I said at the beginning, this is not just an attempt to like look at this subreddit and make fun of the participants here. I actually thought that comment reflected some of the healthy sexual principles that you talked about last time, saying that we don't, force people recognizing consent and autonomy. I don't really love the sarcastic comment at the end when someone's coming for help, but it is what it is, right? Do you have any thoughts about that first comment?
No, that this commenter agrees with us right. It's about choice. So what is missing in the OP? Did I use that right?
Mm-hmm.
In the OP's right relationship, where the conversation seems stifled. It sort of ends, and the response is, well, okay, I'll do it, but on my terms. There's whatever is going on in that, it appears, I'm not saying I know, but what is preventing them from continuing that conversation with curiosity, with vulnerability and curiosity? Those are the two that I talk about with my clients the most. And can he be more curious than vulnerable? What I mean by that is, can he share this with his partner, but then sit in a space of listening to really understand more than to be understood? It's not every therapist is going to teach that, but when it comes to sex, right? Can he be more curious than vulnerable?
What impact, if any, on desire issues in marriage can the church's teaching about like abstaining from masturbation even in marriage? I know the church has basically walked away from a lot of that. It used to be a lot stricter enforced, I guess is the way I would put it. I think it's softened in the recent years, but I guess that's another thought I had when reading this post is, if you're a higher desire partner, outside a strict interpretation of the law of chastity, there are other options, right? There's issues like, or there's options like masturbation. But if that's something that they don't feel they can do because of their interpretation of the law of chastity, how does that contribute to desire issues in a marriage?
The main contribution is the inability for couples to discuss this. It became secret. Most of my clients, especially my male clients, but not only, both say, I have this solo sexual behavior over here and this partnered behavior over here, and they're just so far apart. They're not allowed to be integrated. So because of those teachings, these cultural beliefs, these cultural messages they receive, the inability to have conversations around this is what happens. That if that were a factor in his sexuality, my hypothesis is he's not able to discuss that with this partner.
Yeah, so it may not even necessarily be right. So if I'm hearing you right, it may not even necessarily be about the lack of that behavior. It's more the lack of even being able to talk about it that can cause issues.
It creates this secrecy. It creates this fear. When you read the word guilt twice in one post, right? Typically, guilt is a fear, right? It's based on fear, and it's the fear of abandonment. Shame and guilt and fear are just so overlapping. And this person, my guess would be, most of the time, in what I experience within my office, is they're afraid to even mention that because of fear of abandonment. That there's guilt that comes from her sex. Might be guilt from, right, his solo sexual behaviors. if they are, we're not saying this Redditor, but you ask the question if someone else says that, right? Can you discuss those with your partner?
Yeah, and then the second comment kind of goes along with what we've been talking about, more shaming based on the first comment, but another commenter said, maybe, just maybe, if you spent less time on Reddit in subs like Riverdale Girls, Cuckold, and Gooned. So the way Reddit works, Mike, is you've got these different subreddits. So for example, these subreddits would all be dedicated to those types of topics. And then they said, and more time focusing on her, maybe you might have a different outcome. I don't know, just saying. So you can see a lot of the kind of typical, I guess, shaming behavior for, what that individual is exploring on Reddit.
So did the OP, do you follow a subreddit, so is he a member of those Reddits?
And yeah, so or he must
poster have say, it looks like I can see on your profile that you follow these if you weren't spending time on these.
Yeah, either you can show as a participant in that subreddit, or maybe they've written posts or comments in that subreddit. So yeah, you can track people's activity across Reddit, and that's obviously what was happening there.
Yeah. And my next question, similar question would be, if this OP is a member, is on those, does their partner know, right? And it's likely that the answer is no. It's like
almost certainly,
yeah. And what's the question is what's preventing them from this OP from being able to share these subreddits with their in-life partner, right? With their marriage partner, instead of having this separate sexuality. That would be a question I'd be curious about.
Yeah, I think it also just that the attitude in that comment, regardless of how anyone feels about, that Redditor's, preferences or whatever, they can explore whatever they want, in my view. But I think the thing that's interesting to me is it's almost like shaming that person and almost saying like you're causing these issues because you have interest in these topics. It's very much like almost like pointing the finger at them and saying like you're causing the desire issue in your marriage because of what you're doing.
And my response to that would be, it's not the interest in these topics that's causing it. It's the inability, or if that's true, the inability, which so commonly I experience, the inability for them to discuss it with their partner.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm really interested in these subreddit topics.
Here was another take from the comments that I thought was actually, pretty measured and more progressive than I was expecting. In the long term, duty sex is unfulfilling for both. Let me pause there for a second, Mike, and maybe you can give people kind of your take on what duty sex means. It's kind of like sex out of obligation, if I understand it correctly, right?
Yeah, and we have a really big resource actually here locally and within our community. Dr. Cammie Hurst is local here to where you and I are in the Boise, Idaho area. She has a PhD in sexology, is a sex therapist who just did some research on duty sex, and she has a phrase called consensual unwanted sex. And she looked at she ended up interviewing her sample. Seems to say it sort of ended up to be these post-religious or religious or post-religious females who are in heterosexual relationships who've never experienced sexual abuse. And she does a great job of showing the effects of duty sex, where it's consensual, right? I'm saying yes, like the brain is saying yes, but the body's saying no, that it's not really wanted. So duty sex and consensual unwanted sex are very common in these relationships, especially when, whether it's purity culture or chastity system, that, like I said, where the system says to females, you need to be always sexually available to your partner. And to men, it's the only sexual availability is your wife.
Right. So it kind of leaves people at a weird impasse, right?
Yeah, the long-term effects of duty sex can be found in the wonderful research of Dr. Cammie Hurst, if your listeners want to look it up.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great resource. Thank you. So this commenter said, in the long term, duty sex is unfulfilling for both. My wife and I struggled with a similar situation when we were younger. What really helped me was learning that she needed an environment, intimacy, closeness, connection, safety, to be able to get in the mood. I also needed to learn how to touch her to make it as pleasurable for her as possible. You want a partner in your bedroom adventure. I now know I was doing so many things wrong. I learned a lot from listening to Sex for Saints podcast. I would have talked with my wife about the things I learned to understand her better. And she learned what she was actually feeling, but not able to express. I crave the intimacy and closeness as much as the physical part of our relationship now. It also helps if the wife will make effort to listen to or read available resources. Tammy Hill is also a great resource, as well as the book They Were Not, and They Were Not Ashamed. So there's some additional resources. I thought that commenter's take was a lot healthier and progressive. And like we talked about earlier, responding to the OP, they were talking a lot about some of those healthy sexual principles, like building up intimacy in other ways to try and help the other partner feel safe and valued, that it's not just about the physical side of the relationship.
Yeah, I would. Is it up? Do you up think something? I would. What's up?
Upvote, yeah. Upvote.
I would up post this comment. Definitely an A+ in my book. Like, and the framework, another framework that comes from Natasha Helfer is she calls it her pep talk model, right? Give peace. She says, give yourself permission, educate yourself. So look at all this education you're doing, right? Practice it. Easiest way to get over a fear, and if sexual fears, is to practice them. And then the T is talk about it. Okay. Again, the main point here is this Redditor saying, educate yourself and talk about it with your partner. I literally tell my clients, Colby, my couples clients, I said, I want to teach you everything that you need to know to have better conversations with each other. So instead of paying me to have the conversations, you'll go on walks and have them.
Yeah.
Just go ahead. But some people need tools in order to have these conversations.
Right.
Yeah. Educate yourself about this, right? Give yourself permission to have sex, educate yourself about sex, practice it together, but talk about it. Talk about it with your partner, talk about it with trusted friends, talk about it with therapists, talk about it on, listen to podcasts about it like this. Those are great resources.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. Okay, on to our next post. So the original
this isn't quite, this is less of a lobbed, a softball toss.
Yeah,
right?
This is less of a softball. Probably don't run into this one as often in discussion. Although, I don't know, maybe you do. So
in my office, something on this type of topic more end up in my office. Maybe not the exact form of what the person's doing, but the type of behavior.
Yeah. So the original poster here titled this, "Husband Asked Other Girls for Topless Pics." I'm not sure where to start, but every once in a while, my husband will cheat online with people on social media. For a while, maybe the last 2 months or more, I felt like I needed to do a deep dive into his social media accounts. And today I found messages of him striking up casual conversations with busty women, flattering them and asking them to send him topless photos. I'm heartbroken. If this was the first time in our 5.5-year marriage, that would be one thing, but it's not. This is at least the 4th time. I've honestly forgiven him each time. Will this ever stop? For what it's worth, I'm the high drive partner. If he doesn't lack any sexual touch from me, it happens all the time for him. All right, Mike, what's your take on the original post here?
Like I said, my initial take is this is what ends up in my office, right? And for whatever reason, and so far, my experience with this, when we talk about desire discrepancy or drive discrepancies, more often it's the female high drive partner with a male lower drive partner that ends up in my office. I think that's a common consequence dynamic of the religious culture that we experience it in, where she somehow was able to process these messages in a way to maintain some healthy sexuality. And I think you used the term like this last time, that his message, like the message that men get, is if they're sexual beings, they're monsters. Isn't that the word you used? You felt like,
I think I said rapey monster, but yes.
Rapey monster.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not saying that of this person, but that's, often the message that men get is, okay, you're monsters, you're unsafe, you're predators, right? And now when they get in with their partner, they can't take that sexuality towards their partner. Some people refer to it as a Madonna whore complex, like, oh, I need to treat her like this chaste sexual partner, but I can go do hoary things with other women, and maybe. So this is what ends up in my office. That's the first thought I had. The second comment I'd like is that phrase in there. I felt like I needed to do a deep dive into his social media accounts for the past 2 months. All right. So what happened 2 months ago is what I'd ask. When did you, and what prevented you from having that conversation? So you'll see later some great posts, some people say having like, right. But what's preventing them from, it sounds like he engages in these behaviors. It gets discovered, and there's a difference between discovering a behavior and sharing it, right? If we discover someone else's behavior, they respond differently than if they initially say, "Hey, hun, look what look at these pictures that I'm attracted to." So this is the fourth time. So they've got this pattern, and part of the pattern, and I'm not saying forgiveness. I have a bad personally, I have a hard time with forgiveness. That's the responsibility seems to be placed on the female partner. That's not always, but on the offended, I'll use the word offended person, to forgive.
Right.
So that she feels like, oh, I'm doing what I'm supposed to. I'm supposed to forgive him. Maybe, and I'd explore with them, and I'll honor her belief in forgiveness and support it. But maybe because she's forgiving him, that might be preventing them from continuing the conversation after the forgiveness. So there's this pattern that I'd explore with them. Okay, the behavior, the discovery, the forgiveness, and then something happens, and then for 2 months there's no conversation. Why? What did she not? I'd be very, very curious. Again, like I told you, half the time I spend as a therapist, I've got this Sherlock Holmes hat on, right? I'm investigating. Okay, what is it about? I'd be very curious about these 2 months. I'd be very curious about the patterns. Those are the type of things that initially stopped my attention. And the answer, will it ever stop? That's a great question.
Yeah, one of the things I was really struck by is that pattern is, if this is at least the fourth time, they say, in a 5.5-year marriage, that's almost, once a year that this female partner that's the OP is dealing with, like you said, this discovery of this issue that obviously is not something they've discussed openly and healthily, and that it's consensual behavior, kind of shared between the two of them. That pattern would be troubling to me. It kind of doesn't matter what the boundary is, but if one partner has set a boundary in a marriage and that boundary has been violated now at least 4 times in 5.5 years, that is going to affect the marriage in other ways, right? And I think you can probably speak to this much better than me, but what might start as a problem in desire or in openness and sharing something that he's into sexually is very likely going to have a lot bigger and broader effects in their overall relationship because of the lack of trust, because of the lack of intimacy and being able to share something that he's obviously into. If this is something that he's done, at least 4 times in 5.5 years, that's kind of my take, is just like, what do you do when someone continues to I'm assuming that the female partner here, just based on the tone and the way they've written it, that this is a boundary for them, right? Because they're saying like, will this ever stop? Am I going to continue to deal with this? So that's my thought, is like, how sustainable is a relationship when a boundary, regardless of how, listeners may feel about setting that boundary, this person has set that boundary, and that boundary has been violated now 4 times in 5.5 years. That's sending a message to that partner that what's important to them isn't important to their partner, or at least isn't important enough to have an honest conversation about whether that boundary works for the male partner here.
And so here's what's interesting when you said that is you use the word important, and here's what research tells us about honesty. Okay. Fear, and usually it's the fear of abandonment, because we discovered, right, fear is a more motivating factor than importance or desire to be, live according to principles, or to be a good person or perceived as a good person. There's something in here. I'd be curious as to what prevents either of them, but especially him, and it's likely fear, to be able to say, hey, I am feeling blank. And I'd help explore that with him. What's the emotions he's experiencing? What's the purpose? It's often that we find that, these solo or secretive sexual behaviors are more based on, right, emotion regulation than they are this addiction model, right? So what's going on with him, right? Are there triggers? Are there things that cause him that when he's stressed out, but what are the things that initiate this behavior? And then what's preventing him from going to his partner and say, hey, you know how I like to get pictures of busty women? I think I'd like to do that now. And I'm not turning to you to fix it for me, but I'm just letting you know. Right? We're not putting the burden on her to now, regulate. I'd also explore, is there something about naughtiness, about secrecy that's erotic to him? Right? That, what is it about these getting pictures from other women that is enticing or interesting or erotic for him? And I don't ask partners to become pornography, but could she become part of that that eroticness, that naughtiness? Right? Have you seen? I haven't watched all the shows, but I see a lot of clips. And I mentioned this in our last episode from Modern Family. Is that the name of the show? Where the one couple every Valentine's Day they go to a bar and pretend to meet each other up, right? To create this role play, this sense of naughtiness, right? This eroticness that comes from doing, one of the things I've seen on a reel is, well, why would you do this to your wife and cheat on her, right? There's something about that's missing. So when we have these conversations going to those sexual health principles that we've discussing, he's being exploitive. So exploitation. So non-exploitation is where we put the word autonomy for right? To be non-exploitive. As I mentioned before, is when we use power control or dishonesty to get what we want out of a relationship. And so he's exploiting her assumption of his honesty. He's when we share something from a partner and they think we're being honest and we're not engaging it, and we are, and we just continue to interact with them. That is, some people say it's non-consensual. No, consent is a physical violation. This is an agreement violation, right? They made agreements explicitly, right? More implied than right when they got married that he would, he made an agreement and he's not keeping it. And I would first of all label that and explore that with him, let him know that's what his behavior is, and there's consequences to it. And so there's these negative consequences, this rupture in their relationship that he's experiencing. And a lot of time, Colby, it's because of the fear of sharing, right? This solo sexual behaviors, right? We've got a sort of in a range of hierarchy of, of violation, right? There's just masturbating, right? Sometimes can be a violation. Viewing pornography can be in that bottom level. The middle level I mentioned is where we are the digital infidelity, I call it, where we actually interact with people instead of just look at them. And then the third one is to meet up with people in real life. Whatever level this is, they're all violating an agreement that they've made. Right. If that's what this couple agreed on, hey, don't view pornography, don't interact with other people, right? These are exploitive behaviors.
Right. And I think we can tell that because the way the OP describes it is they do say, my husband will cheat online with people on social media. So it seems pretty clear that that's part of the agreement that they've reached.
Yep. And he's being exploitive. And I would label that with him, explore that with him, and figure out what's preventing both of them. What's preventing him before the behavior to share that with interest with her, and what's preventing her when she's sus about it to take 2 months before she initiates instead of the conversation. Notice that she chose to explore, look into the discovery. That's really curious for me, is what I would ask her, not to say anything negative about behavior. I'm not, what's the word, blaming her for that, but I'm just curious, why did you go look at his media instead of go to him and have this conversation?
Right. Especially for a 2-month period. That seems like a rather long time to kind of sit and stew on feelings like that.
Again, I'm not, no shade, no blame on her. I'm just saying that's curious. That's interesting to me. That's caught my eye, is what prevented you from going to him. What's right? These sexual health principles, the purpose of teaching them to you and talking about them so much with your listeners is hopefully people will have more conversations, sexual health related conversations with their partners.
Yeah, exactly. So there were a few comments here, and I liked this comment. And then we actually have a reply from the OP. So tip number 1, ask for full honesty without judgment. Ask to see them. Don't snoop around for them. So that goes along with the comments you just had, really. Tip number 2, do not take it personally. It's probably not anything you are doing wrong, but it is something he will struggle with his whole life or until he gets bored. So before we talk about the OP's reply to that comment, what strikes you about that comment?
Yeah, let's keep it up. Well, first, I would upvote it again. It strikes me that, that having non-judgmental, right? And it's okay if there's judgment in it. We'd explore that, right? There's a lot of right, when someone is exploited, there's these concept called betrayed partner. I prefer the concept of an exploited partner, and it's just because of the models I take. But right, ask to see them. Don't snoop around. It's like, what would it be like for her to say, hey, can you show me what what you're looking at, what you're interested in? Right. And then number 2 is it is, and that's a hard thing to do, is to not take it personally, regardless of gender. If a person has a partner who's engaging in cheating behavior, it is definitely hard not to take it personally. I don't know if I'd say that directly to somebody, but I would ask if they do feel it, take it personally. I think it's a great thing to explore. But it's usually not about the partner specifically. It's something more about the relationship dynamics that prevent them from having these type of conversations to get past that pattern that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. The OP then replied, so this is the person who was sharing, wrote the post. OMG, I hadn't thought about it that way. I appreciate the advice. He knows that I love him. That phrase is really interesting to me because it almost assumes that him feeling like he's not loved by her is the reason that he's engaging in these behaviors, which I think really shows not understanding probably where these behaviors come from. And I think that, to your comments about open and honest communication, I think it shows that this marriage, again, not judging these people, but it indicates to me that this marriage does not have that level of open and transparent communication, by assuming that this is the way she's writing about this, is assuming that if he just understood that she loved him, that he wouldn't engage in these behaviors. And I think that's probably just simply not true. Then she continues and says, and the way we discuss issues like this are so different from our first marriages. So this is second marriages for both of these individuals. Still, it hurts. But we have a savior who loves both of us and wants our marriage to work, and so do we. And actually, my question for you about this comment back from the OP is about that last sentence. Is how often in a religious system where we have messages about the atonement, about forgiveness, which I think you already talked about when we were talking about the first thread that we looked at, do people, because when I see that last comment, what I see is we have to make this marriage work because of our religious commitments. And I guess my question is, at what point, like, some people just are not compatible, right? They are not going to be able to make a relationship work long term. How often, I guess, does a belief that marriage is also not just like a personal and a commitment between the couple, but is a religious commitment, that it affects your salvation? How often does that maybe cause people to stay in a marriage that simply isn't going to work? And I'm not suggesting that that's the case here, but just that comment kind of signals that to me, right? Like, the Savior wants our marriage to work, and so do we. So we're going to make it work. There's part of me that's like, well, if this boundary is super important to this poster and it's been violated at least 4 times in 5.5 years, at what point do they start the conversation about whether there is just an overall compatibility issue with boundaries, with intimacy? Do you know what I'm asking? I guess it's kind of an inchoate question, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's this idea that marriage in religious spheres must work, and they'll work more likely if we keep all the promises that the religion gave to us. So one of the researchers that I read, her name's Dr. Camden Morgante. I don't know if I pronounced her last name right. She has this what's called the fairy tale myth in purity culture, that says that, hey, if you do A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z before you're married, and then when you're married, you do A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z, that it'll all work out.
Right.
Yeah. And, these two people being in a second marriage, if you go back to the original post where she says, for what it's worth, right? I'm sexually available to him. I'm the high drive partner. He doesn't lack any sexual touch from me. It happens all the time for him, right? She's also been told that possibly that, hey, if you're sexually available to him, which this OP sounds very sex positive to me, right? And you see some religious questions you have in it, but she's like, hey, I want to work with this. I'm understanding of him, and you'll see even later on in some other comments she makes that she's doesn't blame him or tell him he's a rapey monster like you described. It sounds like to me that you couldn't hear it that way. To me, it's saying that, but we have a savior who loves both of us and wants our marriage to work, and so do we. I just hear someone saying they want their marriage to work. I don't know that it's saying that it's because of their religion. Having a belief in a system and a savior who loves you can be helpful, and both helpful and harmful in sexual marriages.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate that. I did not pull any other comments from that, but if you had other ones that you wanted to highlight, please go ahead.
I actually, this was the one I went and looked up. So that's why, later on, she says that, this is the one of the few that I looked at. And she says his first wife was very blamey towards him. And so I didn't catch that you didn't put him on there. And I don't want to blame him for being this way. So she's very sex positive.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, moving on to our next post. This one is titled Receiving Oral Denied. My wife and I are active members in the LDS Church. I know the name is fully spelled out. It's just easier to reference LDS. I really enjoy pleasing my wife, so much so that I will perform foreplay on her up to 2 hours at a time or most times. I like to give her multiple O's. When she is having a big one, I will go down on her, which drives her really crazy. She enjoys it immensely. Then she wants to return the favor and perform oral on me until climax. I deny her this mainly because I feel that it is degrading to women when a guy has her go down on him. The stigma that is behind a woman's performance and the man O's all over her. I tell my wife I respect her too much to have her lower herself to do such an act. She will then inquire about when I go down on her, and I tell her that I have no respect for myself, and she enjoys it when I do. Therefore, it doesn't bother me. In my mind, it's all about the respect for the woman not permitting her to do this. The floor is open for discussion. Well, indeed it is. Mike, what's your first take on this book?
That somewhere in this man's upbringing, he received this difference in gender messaging, right? He received a message that said one thing for men is okay and women, but it's not okay for women. That is my original take, is that that he got this message that it's okay for men to do that. It's okay for women to do this, but it's not okay for men.
Yeah. The first thought I had on this was, and granted, like you talked about, there's a gender discrepancy here. So this probably isn't the full, I'm not pointing to this and saying this is the direct cause of this, but I certainly would think that growing up in a culture where this was an issue, this probably contributed in some way, I would say. So for folks who aren't aware, back in the early 1980s, the church had sent out a letter to stake, mission, district presidents, bishops, basically all ecclesiastical leaders in the church, that had made clear that even inside of marriage, that oral sex was interpreted as constituting, quote, an unnatural, impure, or unholy practice. And the letter said, if a person is engaged in a practice which troubles him it troubles him enough to ask about it, he should discontinue it. And so I think there has been a real resistance to oral sex generally inside of Mormonism since this letter was, shared with leaders, and people would have received this messaging. As we talk about sometimes amongst post-Mormons, right? There's this whole idea of leadership roulette, meaning that how those rules are going to be interpreted and enforced are completely different. Depending on who your leader is. And so I definitely have heard stories from people, who are post-Mormon, where they had bishops who were asking about this, even if the individual wasn't asking about it, and withholding temple recommends from individuals that were married and were consensually engaging in oral sex, behavior between the two of them. And still, there were bishops and stake presidents who felt like that was enough of a justification based on this letter to withdraw temple blessings from people based on that. Now, obviously, that's not all leaders, and I don't know that this letter specifically informed this OP's, concerns or attitudes towards oral sex. But I'd just be remiss if I didn't mention that it's kind of, an issue inside of Mormon culture more generally. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts or opinions on that, Mike.
On the letter itself,
Mm-hmm.
Too many is my answer. That the message here that you're referring to is basically saying that, hey, as a religious institution, it's our job to tell you as the members of our religion what sex is okay and what's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of there's lots of double standards there, but fortunately, like you said, hopefully most of your listeners didn't get this downloaded. But it does maintain downloaded that like oral sex, whether someone wants to give or receive it of either gender, the message is, like you said earlier, that's what rapey monsters want to do.
Right. And
Right.
that phrase that they use, it's not even just like we don't advise this, or this is something we advise against. It's an unnatural, impure, or unholy practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see the attitude that's reflected in the OP about like, this is degrading to women, it's hard for me to not see a connection between that attitude that's expressed in that letter and the attitude that's expressed in the OP, at least with respect to, a woman performing oral sex.
Yep. And so what I also hear, especially if you go back to the
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, it's about the respect for the women for not permitting her to do this.
Mm-hmm.
There's this double standard that says it's okay for men but not for women, and this position of authority, right? Because he's a priesthood holder in his household, he is responsible for protecting her, that he's got this responsibility to protect her and not permit her to do things, because in his eyes he sees it as protecting females. That's where I would be curious. So what I often do with my clients is I'll do what I call a sexual messaging history with them and audit and explore when did you, if I check for accuracy, and I'll say, hey, when did you get the message that it's your job to decide what women can do, permitting them to do? When did you get the message that it's behind, the stigma of that is behind a woman's performance and the man's? Or where did you get this message about stigma? Where did you get this message that says it's this double standard is what I'd call it, and label it, and carefully with this type of client explore why and when did you get this message? And the second question I'd ask him is, does he want to keep it, or ask his partner even too, do you want him to keep it? And if they have different answers, then we explore that. If he does want to keep it, then then I honor that and explore that with him and discuss the effects it has on his relationship, and then see if he's willing to negotiate anything with his partner if that's what her goal is. But also, if he doesn't want to keep it, what would he want to replace it with?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've all got these sexual messaging histories. Each of us do. That during our upbringing, we got all these messages. We have a history of them, and not many of us have gone through and explored them. And then after we've explored and identified them, I decided whether or not we want to keep them. And so that's the approach I would take with this type of, if this were end up in my office.
Let me ask you a question about one phrase that kind of jumps out to me. And I know you've mentioned a few times this double standard idea. I think it's really interesting that it specifically says the wife wants to return the favor. So this is something she's asking to do.
Yeah.
And yet it's almost like he feels the need to protect her from something she would like to do for him or with him sexually. That seems like it's weird because it's kind of the flip side of the coin of not allowing someone else's autonomy. But if this is something that she enjoys doing, wants to do, but he feels like it's degrading to her, there's kind of like a weird paradox there, almost like a double bind, right? Where he's in a way removing agency from her, but in a way that's different than lack of consent that we've talked about in other posts. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or am I correctly noticing something?
The phrase that we have in my field is "don't yuck your partner's yum," but it doesn't mean you have to engage it. It's like,
sure,
I'm not saying that this partner he needs to engage in receiving oral sex from his wife.
Right.
What I would want to explore with him is reasons why. And it sounds like if it's a no, like he said here, I tell my wife I respect her too much to have her lower herself to do such an act. She will then inquire about when I go down on her, and I tell her that I have no respect for myself. And she enjoys it when I do. Well, the question is, does he say in here, does he enjoy receiving oral sex? And it sounds like he doesn't. And I'm not opposed. I'm not going to say that's wrong of him.
Right. Of course, everybody has the right to.
But I'm curious. I'm curious about how if he could express that to her, right? Why don't you respect yourself? Why does receiving oral sex mean you wouldn't respect your head? It's not a respectful thing to experience. There's just a lot of messaging that would be explored here.
Right. And that's where that messaging audit, I think you talked about using as a tool in your office, comes into play. So here were some comments, some commenters' takes from this thread. Your concept of respect and disrespect are skewed. Going down on someone isn't a form of debasement. It is a form of worship. You go down on your wife and worship the goddess that she is and can become. Why would you deny her the right to go down on you and worship the God that she sees you are and will be? I will say I really don't like the use of the term right there. Like, you're denying her the right to go down on you. That seems very weird. But overall, I like the sentiment of this first comment, just like pointing out the double standard like you talked about. But of course, recognizing that if this man just doesn't like someone engaging on that behavior for him, that's entirely permissible too. Like, everyone in a partnership gets the right to like and not like certain things. And then it's a conversation, like you said, about negotiation, about boundaries, about, are there other ways that we could fulfill that desire? But what did you think about that first comment? Any takes on that?
I was just impressed that this, I don't know, can we assume too much here? But if this is a believing, active LDS sexuality subreddit poster, that they obviously, worship and goddess are the opposite of what were the words that the letter said, unnatural and impure. So
right.
I'm just impressed that this person has a different opinion from that letter.
Yeah, like I said, it's much more. There were a lot more progressive takes in this subreddit than I originally assumed from some other posts I've seen over the years. Yeah. The next comment said, "Is this for real? If you're serious, there's nothing inherently degrading in a partner choosing to give pleasure to the other partner. Full stop. If you have hangups with her giving you pleasure in that way, fine. If she doesn't want you doing that for her, fine. Those are things you can work out with each other and with your therapist." And aside from just the progressive messaging of that one, I'm also impressed that they referenced therapy. I feel like growing up in the church at the time that I did, I don't know I ever remember like a specific talk or anything that denigrated therapy or the field of therapy. No offense, Mike. But I just remember walking away with the idea that like therapy is like the secular world's alternative to like the gospel, and that if you really just understood the gospel, you wouldn't really need therapy. So I'm happy to see that attitude really isn't shared by a lot of, at least the participants in this subreddit today, that they're referencing therapy and specifically sex therapy in a positive way. I was impressed by that comment.
Yeah, and I think it's impressive for the OP to be comfortable to give oral sex.
Mm-hmm.
It's the curiosity as to why he views it disrespectful and degrading. Right? There's something about, I think it's called this spiritual barometer myth that's happening, where he says that, right, my wife's value is determined around her sexual behaviors, and if she engages that, it's a barometer of her respect, that a female can't receive respect because it's degrading for a female to give a male oral sex.
Mm-hmm. Does this come back to that Madonna horror
exactly
complex that you talked about? Like, basically, if I understand the idea, it's like people who subscribe to that, maybe even unknowingly, falsely believe that women have to fall into either or of those camps, right? That you can't basically have a woman that enjoys exploring their sexuality, including some behaviors like we're talking about here, while also, being a righteous, daughter of God in their worldview. Do I understand it correctly? Okay.
Yeah, is that if the only two tropes or stereotypes, so those that those words better than me, that a female can have from the Bible, the reading of the Bible, is that she's either Madonna or like the Virgin Mary, and her virginity is the value of her worth. The only, there's a couple prophetesses in the Bible, but the other female trope is that of a whore. And this, this OP is of the opinion that that he can, it's great that he has that opinion that it's okay to give a female pleasure, but if she gives a male pleasure, that makes her degrading, right? Can't respect her. What the word we would use for that would be, he thinks she should be a whore. And so there's just something, that in the messaging, right? These are messages that he's received, and I'd explore those with him. And that's what I'm most curious about, is the messages.
Cool. Okay, this is a longer one. So this OP is titled, "How do I build back up to intimacy after spouse slipped up with pornography?" And this is a longer one, Mike. So you just indicate if you want me to pause for any thoughts as I read through this one, okay?
Okay.
So TLDR, which means too long didn't read. So that's like the way that Redditors summarize things. My husband confessed to me that he had a slip up with pornography a couple times in the last few weeks. We are currently working through it right now, and he's doing all the right things. I just have no idea how to build back up to being intimate with him and would love some advice. I wanted to share in this thread because I want thoughts from members who share the same gospel-rooted beliefs about pornography. I feel like if I was to share this anywhere else, I'd be told to get over myself and that pornography is fine.
Let's pause right there.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a sex therapist, again, I've finished completed the requirements to be a certified sex therapist, sent in the application. I'm waiting for it back. I support people's beliefs and opinions about pornography. So that's the first thing I like to stop there and say, yeah, I understand that they think that they won't get that support, but I just like to say that as sex therapists, it's part of our ethical code to support people's beliefs. I'll help them explore them. I'll help them explore where they gathered them. And like I said, then decide if they want to keep them. And once they've made that decision, that determines where we go next in therapy. So I just wanted to pause that and say that.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, because I was actually going to make a very similar comment. Obviously, I don't have the background that you do, but I think it's very important that we recognize, especially when we're talking about sexual health and sexual principles, that people get to choose their own boundaries and limits. And if this couple or if this individual has decided that pornography is something that they don't want to participate in or they don't support inside their partnership, then that's completely their prerogative to decide, right? That's what consent means. That's what autonomy means, is that people get to draw those limits for themselves. Like you said, that still might mean let's explore where you got the idea of where these limits should come from or how serious to treat them. But yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with people deciding to draw limits and lines in their relationship.
Yeah. And not many of us, I don't know if I could say most or few, but the next question I have with in this situation is, do people separate pornography from masturbation? Okay. Most of us experience, regardless of gender, learned somehow in our childhood that if we rubbed our genitals in a particular way, it would be a positive feeling. Eventually, most of us figured out as in our childhood that we could produce an orgasm and it felt good. Most of us and sometimes it goes in a different order. We find pornography or masturbation first, right? We also learned that if we pair that with the use of erotic material, most of us call that pornography. Most of us don't include erotic audio material. We realize that that can facilitate that process. And so what I do with my clients also is I explore their values around both of those. What is your personal and shared partner value that you have around masturbation or solo sexual behaviors and around pornography? And I don't think many people separate them. Do you think most people separate them?
No, and I think definitely the OP here is talking about them as a joint thing.
Yeah,
I would assume. Yeah. Yep, I think you're right about that. Anyways, I would like to give some context. This is back to the OP. I have been married for a little over a year. My husband and I have been together for 2.5 years total. One of the things that did kind of strike me about this is that seems like a rather long relationship.
Yeah, year and a half. There, I'm married my wife in 6 months so that sex would be legal. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we weren't 6 months, but yeah, we were married within a year of getting home from our missions. So yeah, pretty close. When my husband and I first started dating, he was completely open with me about his past and current struggles with pornography. He was going to the men's group, therapy, and also had a personal plan set in place that he was very proactive with. He told me that he wanted to be honest about the fact that he still struggled, but was very optimistic that this wouldn't be a problem in his life for much longer. During the time we dated, he'd had a few slip ups. I was always devastated, but was always thankful that he was so open with me about it. During the time that we were dating, I was very prayerful, and I always felt reassured from the Spirit that everything he was saying was truthful, and that I could move forward in peace and continue progressing in our relationship. By the time we got married, there hadn't been any slip ups for about 6 months. Fast forward to now, we've been married for a little over a year, so it's been about 1.5 years since his last slip up. Unfortunately, last week he confessed to me that he slipped up a couple of times about 2 weeks ago and was waiting to tell me. I was absolutely heartbroken. Discussing this in marriage hurts so much more deeply because when we were dating, we hadn't been intimate. I'll skip a lot of the details about my reaction, but I was shattered. I was telling maybe that we should separate for a bit and that there is zero, and that's in caps, zero tolerance for pornography in our marriage. After lots of prayers and lots of pondering, I decided that I didn't want to separate. I felt the Spirit very strongly as I navigated forward and felt that we'd be okay. We've had many long, deep talks. He's contacted our bishop for us to meet with him, and he's reconstructed a new action plan and has given me all the details about how he's going to be much more intentional with his plan. I have faith and hope about moving forward. I love him so much, and I'm so thankful he's been so honest with me. I just don't know how to get back to where we were before in terms of intimacy. I can't even kiss him right now. He's been very respectful of my needs and my timing, and although I am craving to connect with him in that way, I just feel like I can't get there emotionally right now. I would love any thoughts or advice from anybody who has had experiences with this. All right, Mike, what's your takes?
Lots and lots. What are your original takes?
Well, one of the thoughts I had is, recognizing everything we talked about before, which is that people can draw boundaries for their relationship, and that's entirely part of respecting people's autonomy and consent. Is I just am really struck by how often I feel like I've heard lots of men from either the active or post-Mormon realm share how they often turn to pornography and masturbation as a type of like self-soothing emotional regulation behavior.
Yeah.
And my original thought here is I just don't know how to get back to where we were before in terms of intimacy. I can't even kiss him right now. I guess my first thought is if this spouse has engaged in this behavior as a type of self-soothing, self-regulating behavior, And now it's led to this gigantic issue in their marriage where the spouse is talking about separation and potentially talking about divorce,
Mhm.
and is getting to the point where she feels like she can't even engage in any type of intimacy, including like kissing him, which is entirely her right and prerogative to do, to be very clear. But my thought is just, I can see a destructive cycle starting to form here, almost like how you can see like a convection cell that forms a tornado. I'm kind of like, I'm wondering if we'll see a similar type of pattern here. Back when my wife and I were still active, and I still follow some of her stuff, we would listen to Dr. Jennifer Finlayson Fife's
Mhm.
podcast and her messages about sex. And one of the things I really liked about the way she addressed pornography is that she pointed out how oftentimes messages in the church focus so explicitly on pornography and shame around pornography that it can lead men to engage in kind of this destructive cycle. And so that's one of my first thoughts. The other thing I will say to this commenter that I think is really good is there is a lot of open and honest communication about this, it seems like, um, between the two of them. So
Mhm.
that's always good, seeing them
Mhm.
communicating openly and honestly. Um, aside from that, I think, again, recognizing that everyone has the right to define their own boundaries and define their own autonomy, I just am struck by how difficult it would be to end a marriage over like several uses of pornography. Just seems like a very drastic step to me, while also recognizing that people have the right to draw their own boundaries. But it just seems like you're going to end a 2.5 year relationship over several uses of pornography over 1.5 years. Just seems like a very drastic step.
Yeah. It does seem that way. I'm not gonna, like you said, we're gonna respect that that's the message she got, that
Right.
I might label them and rank these different levels of infidelity, but
Right.
for an individual, they all feel the same, and
Right.
I'll honor and respect that. The experience they have here, though, with this plan that he has is what I'm very curious about. So, does that plan include, right? Has he identified when, like you said, whether we call them triggers or not, right? But what happened 2 weeks ago? What about their relationship prevented him from saying, like I said, I'm feeling blank right now in the past? And to turn to her and say this, hey, partner, loved one, hun, whatever the term you use, I'm feeling blank right now. And has he gone through and identified the blank? That's for me is like, are there a pattern from either from now or in the past as to when he turns to pornography instead of anything else? Again,
Mm,
let's make the guess here as an emotion regulation tool. And instead of saying like, I don't know what I'm curious about his plan. This plan he has, is it a plan to, I don't know, maybe pray when he feels this way? Prayer is an emotion regulation tool, right? Read his scripture. I don't know what he has planned is, but could it include turning to her and this is what I think will increase their intimacy, to say, I'm feeling blank right now. This is when I normally would turn to pornography. I'm not turning to you to fix it, but I just turning to you to let you know. And this is what I'm
mm,
doing instead.
mm.
And list what he's
Yeah,
doing instead.
the other thing I was really struck by them talking about the plan is, earlier, I think it was in our last conversation, you talked about purity culture and Mormonism's kind of unique take on purity culture.
Mhm.
And one of the things you talked about is that it progresses, it's all about ownership, and it progresses from like God owns your body, you don't own your body. God owns your body, and then your partner owns your body, basically, was my takeaway from something you said in our first conversation. I think a lot of people feel that way growing up in the church, that their sexual, like their body's sexual behavior does not belong to them. It belongs to their partner, or it belongs to God when
Mhm.
they fall within that pre-marriage category. And my thought is just like, how sexually engaged can you feel when your partner is basically, again, we don't know the details of this plan, but the whole idea of having a plan isn't necessarily a bad thing. It kind of depends on what that looks like, but what it's premised off of is, again, this like ownership model of my partner owns my sexuality because they talk about this plan and he's revised this plan. And I guess there's just part of me that wonders how sexual you are able to feel when you have this type of, attitude towards your own sexuality, that you do not own it.
Well, I experienced this in my office for both believing clients and post-believing clients. This, you take out the word spirit from this, and I would be convinced that many of your post-religious, post-orthodoxy, I'll call them, who I guess listens to Colby Reddish, right? We're going to have a very similar experience, that even though we're post-religious, my partner, if it's just the pornography, it might go to a different level, that these men, just because they've left doesn't mean that they have this ability to automatically be emotionally vulnerable with their partners. And I think that's often, what I experience is that's often what's missing is, can she continue to regulate herself enough and have this space, because she wants to have intimacy. And part of intimacy is co-regulating. It's not coming to her and saying, I'm feeling blank, I normally turn to pornography, so you take that role, you soothe me. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I am trying to soothe myself. Can I come to you also? And can she be in a regulatory space? Right? How dysregulating is for her to have experienced this, but to also be part of a new plan. That's what I would suggest in the new sexual health plan. And I do use the concept of sexual health plans after individuals identify the sexual health principles, saying, okay, wherever you're at in your sexuality, whatever role whatever values you have around the use of pornography, are you comfortable with it? Is she comfortable if her husband masturbates? Is she comfortable if he masturbates without pornography? Is that dysregulating? Is that violating to her connection with him as it is just to view pornography? So the lots of things to explore.
Yeah. Yep. Well, some of the comments here, this commenter said he slipped up after a year and a half and you call it an addiction. It's worth noting the OP actually never used that word addiction.
Okay, good. I didn't check here.
Yeah. Yes, the brethren have counseled us to avoid pornography. I don't know where they have counseled to break a marriage over what you have experienced. Frankly, I believe the church has shifted how it discusses pornography over the last decade, partially because we have otherwise decent marriages getting thrown out the window over situations similar to this. Look at your ward. 100% of the men under 40 have viewed porn. I would wager a majority have in the last 2 years. You have to be in a really bad place in a marriage to think hanging it up and hitting the village green is going to result in a better union than what you currently have. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I don't know if I'd post this comment. Is that there are some things that probably are true, that just because men view pornography, you have to be in a really bad place in a marriage thing. I like the sentiment, but I don't know if I like the message overall.
Yeah. My overall thought on that comment is, and I think I've heard this expressed by John DeLynn before, where he says, the vast majority of men have probably viewed pornography, even believing members of the church. And so if this person is going to set the OP, is going to set a hard limit of like, I'm never going to be with anyone who's going to view pornography even occasionally, what they're very likely to encounter or experience is they'll just have a partner that lies about it rather than a partner that is very honest and proactive about what they're working to correct. And again, I view this as like, I don't have the same like religious restrictions that they do on pornography use or viewing, but that's their right to set their limits for their relationship and for their, sexual relationship. And so if it's important enough to them, then they get to define and, prescribe those boundaries amongst them together. And I guess I would hate to see someone throw out a marriage with someone who's honest about their struggles to then, be with someone who says all of the right things, but is likely just doing the same type of behaviors, just not being honest about it, if that makes sense.
And that's good to point out. And the first sentence is TLDR, my husband confessed to me. right?
Mhm.
It's not like the other person, right?
That's true.
I don't think I don't think you and I and your male listeners can fully understand the level of betrayal that she's experiencing. And so I
Mhm.
want to honor that. This is
Mhm.
devastating. It might not feel, or we might think, oh, why it shouldn't be, or it can't be. It is. He has exploited her.
Mhm.
Okay. They had an agreement and very, very open about their agreement. Okay.
Mhm.
He said, and it took him 2 weeks. So, hey, that's better than some, within 2 weeks, he did her, but he came to her and said, hey, I don't want to exploit your assumption. This is the words I would teach him is what he's done is I want to be honest in our relationship. And for 2 weeks, I haven't. So she has months of honesty and only 2 weeks of dishonesty. And now she can decide how long she wants to have it continuing forward. Where he was able to say, I you have us you I told you I would tell you this, but it took me 2 weeks to tell you. And so that's where I would focus on is the 2 weeks. What happened during those 2 weeks? What
Mhm.
happened that initiated him going to pornography? And is that part of his plan going forward? What's it feel like for her to be betrayed? But I would point out to her, hey, you did not discover this. He shared it with you. How does that feel to know that you could have discovered it, that he came to you and shared this with you? He wants to be honest with you in his relationship. Does his new plan include, efforts to prevent it, that it would include you? How would you like to be involved? You like that he has a plan. How would you like to be part of that? Are you part of this plan? Do you want him to come to you and say, how would he best come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking of violating our relational agreement? Because whatever Colby and Mike think about the relational agreement, where we think it's what
Right.
opinion we might have, that's their relational agreement. And if
Exactly.
could he come to you and say, hey, I think this is what was happening when I did it, when I violated it last time. I'm not turning to you to fix it for me, but I'm sharing that with you to help me, hopefully to prevent it. And can she be in that space to be part of that? Would she like to be part of that? And then if he has a new agreement, okay, would his new I label it a sexual health plan. They just called it a plan. Okay, if he does violate this, how soon would you like to know next time?
Mhm.
And I'd ask him, how soon would you like to tell, and make an agreement that his plan now is not to wait 2 weeks. And what's the
Yeah.
best way he could do it? Especially if knowing how he's probably feeling at that time.
Yeah, I really like how you're putting the focus on their choice. They
Mhm.
think that this is their relationship to define. And I think you stated it much better than I inartfully did, which is, yeah, we need to recognize that regardless of how we feel about the same, issues in our marriage or in our relationships, that everybody gets the right to define their own sexual relationship and what intimacy looks like for them, and to have those boundaries, that's entirely permissible. I really like that focus, Mike. A few more comments. I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I am a 45-year-old guy and understand guy psychology. I can tell you that he came to you in an extremely vulnerable place where he knew you'd be disappointed and get mad, but he still did it anyways. That takes a lot of courage and should be encouraged. Try to figure out a way to express disappointment while letting him know you are happy you came to him. I think I think they mean the inverse. You're happy that he came to you. He can always come to you, and that you are his partner in helping him overcome his struggles and not his adversary, however hard that might be for you. Good luck. I liked that comment. I
Yeah.
would upvote that for sure because I
Mhm.
think it's recognizing, like, yeah, like there is and I like that you focused on this too, Mike. There is a difference between discovery and like disclosure, or someone coming and I don't want to use the word confess, but sharing with you, or like you
Yeah.
talked about, having a conversation about the fact that they'd violated the agreement. Um, the next comment was, my question is, how is your husband generally in all other areas? Is he a good husband? I think part of the problem here is you see this as some horrible affront to you. It's not. It probably has little to do with you. I strongly suggest you change your mindset and stop being devastated anytime he lapses. See, I don't like that paragraph at all. That feels like it is minimizing and shaming her for having boundaries and for feeling disrespected that he violated some agreement. This is something that they had talked about repeatedly during that 2.5 year relationship. So I don't like that part of this comment. They then continue and say, porn drives away the spirit and opens us up to more influence from the adversary. It is not a grievous sin threatening your marriage unless you make it that. Treat this as something unproductive that you and he both wish didn't exist, just as I hope he does with you and your sins. Yeah, again, the ending seems to me like it's shaming her for having feelings about this. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that last
I
comment?
completely agree with what you've said. This sounds, I don't know if we could tell, this sounds like she's getting mansplained by somebody.
It totally does. Last comment on this one. I guarantee you won't find a man who never views porn. If you throw your marriage away because he views it sometimes, you'll be leaving a man who is no different than any other good, faithful men who are no better at avoiding porn. Please don't make him feel isolated and ashamed for being human. He needs your love and acceptance to continue to feel safe talking to you about it. Wrap your arms around him and tell him you love him the way he is, and keep the lines of communication open. I coach men on this all the time, and I have a different approach. I have a question if you're interested. What if pornography wasn't the problem? Again, this feels like a very mansplaining comment to me also. Like, what if pornography wasn't the problem? Like, they have decided, what I would say to this commenter is, these individuals have decided in their relationship that pornography is something that is not acceptable. Regardless of how you or me or Mike might feel about that, that's their decision for their relationship.
Yeah.
And while I think it would be productive to have conversations about, like you said, Mike, where they got that messaging, and if they want to continue to subscribe to that same model of a relationship, it seems like they do. It seems like this is something they take very serious. And I would not then like blame her for the way that she's reached, feeling that that's a boundary.
Yeah. I notice, and I probably appreciate that you've not identified the posters. Of course, people can easily go find this subreddit, these posts, right? But I coach men on this all the time. And if you want a different approach, but that approach is telling her to wrap her arms around him and tell him you love him the way he is and keep lines of communication over, doesn't sound very validating to her experience.
Yeah. Yep. And I did a little interesting dive on that particular commenter's Reddit history. And I'll just say it was a very interesting, kind of wild ride in a lot of NSFW subreddits, which is not safe for work subreddits. So I'll just leave it at that. But yes, I did redact off all the names just to protect people's anonymity as much as I could, at least.
Yeah.
I think this is our
my last point on that one is,
yes,
being exploited is the experience that we have when our partners are dishonest with our agreements. And so they've made some agreements, and he was for 2 weeks dishonest, and that's her experience.
And I will say, to give her additional credit too, they had been talking about this even before they had gotten married.
Yeah.
Like, this is something that they had a lot of conversation about from the context that's given in the OP. So I think belittling her or shaming her for having the feeling she has is not the route that I would go. Okay, I think this is our last post for today, Mike. Okay. Do I need to confess this? Hi, all. I, 27 female, have been struggling with reading smut for probably 2 years now. For folks who are unaware of smut, I think that's just kind of a colloquial term that people use for what you've before referred to as like erotica, right? I think this is usually like books or audio erotica, as opposed to like what most people think of as pornography is like visual pornography. So this is like audio or written erotica. So this person has been struggling with reading this for probably 2 years now. My husband is aware that I do it and honestly says he likes it because it makes me horny and he gets to reap the benefits. I have tried many times to stop and often can for about a month before starting again. It makes me feel bad about myself and gives me a lot of guilt-ridden anxiety issues. My question is this something that I need to confess to the bishop in order to fully repent? I have never once masturbated without my husband in the room and asking me to. I only read smut between consenting adults, but I have been putting off renewing my temple recommend because I don't know how to answer the question about sins that should have been confessed but weren't. Would this be something you'd consider one of those sins? Or is this something I can repent for in private without involving a leader? I think that one of the reasons I haven't been able to fully stop is because I'm thinking that my previous repentance isn't good enough anyway, so I might as well continue until I work up the nerve to talk to a bishop about it. Sorry for the rant. Any advice would be appreciated. All right, Mike, what do you think about this one?
I think I'm going to repeat myself in lots of things I've said already, but that it's curious. The big curiosity I have is to why this person, this individual, is delegating their spiritual authority to a subreddit. It's like, okay, that they have these positive experiences with their sexuality. They're open and honest, right? A plus on the sexual compass, right? They're choosing erotic material that they feel is ethical, that they're comfortable with. They're open and honest with their partner about it. I wish the male posters were saying this, right? I view pornography only that right, and my wife knows about it, and we both agree upon it, and whether or not we masturbate solo or separately, we discuss it. Okay, we've had the conversations around it. So A plus plus on everything there, except for I'm curious about the value she has about whether or not it's a sin or not, and the need to confess. And that's more of a cultural thing that I can honor to say, hey, why do you feel this way? What makes you feel that way? The problem here, right, if this were a client, is that they would want me to answer that question for them, which I wouldn't. I'd explore them and help them find it, because that, right, we have this authority, this outside authority that she's trying to find. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, that was my overall thought too, is basically just we see this model of like outsourcing our morality, right? She
Yeah.
obviously views there being no issue with this. Or I guess you could argue the fact that she's conflicted about it indicates maybe she does feel like there is an issue with this, but I don't know.
Yeah, the question is, it something I can repent for in private without involving a leader? And so if this were in my office, I would explore that and say, well, do you think this is something that needs repented of? And if so, do you feel like, it sounds like she feels every time she does it, she's feeling this guilt, right? And guilt, it doesn't do good for sexual pleasure. It's a stifler, right?
And it makes me wonder if this individual, because this is a female, they indicated in the post, if this individual received more of the messaging that normally males receive in growing up in the church. Because it feels like like you talked about, if she's engaging in this behavior healthfully, according to that compass model, her partner is supportive and enjoys engaging in this behavior with her. Like, one of the unstated kind of premises of her post is that this is something that needs to be repented of in the first place. When the question I think that would be more interesting to explore is this something that's just entirely allowable in your sexual relationship? This was a comment I definitely wanted to highlight because it was more progressive, and I thought this was really cool. This commenter says, former bishop here, had you been in my ward, and if you did come in and confess, here's how I would respond. While it's admirable that you want to keep your thoughts 100% pure 100% of the time, you do not need to burden yourself with anxiety and guilt for your thoughts straying. If the stories you are reading are generally wholesome, representing consensual relationships, while also depicting intimate relationships, there is little you need to worry about. If you and your husband are both comfortable with you reading these types of books and they lead to a productive and loving relationship between you two, then why take that away? If you're still feeling guilty, let's talk about counseling options to break down traditional, overly conservative, purity culture type teachings and beliefs so that you can feel free to embrace your sexuality and all the wonderful, divinely designed feelings and capacities that you have been endowed with. Keep your lines of communication open with Heavenly Father and your husband, the three people involved in your new and everlasting covenant, until it gets to the point you are seriously neglecting personal, family, or employment responsibilities, or you are going to extreme means to seek out more material or even more explicit material. I have nothing else to discuss with you about it. Go enjoy yourself. Would that get an upvote from you, Mike?
That would get an upvote from me. I would upvote it, but yeah, I would upvote it. Right. He's blaming purity culture, but without saying that the church teaches that too. Right. whether or not I would discuss this I probably would discuss with the client is this is a female that thinks that she needs to go to at least 3 different men to get permission to be sexual.
Mm.
And that's the experience that females often get. Is she has her male husband has to be okay with it. Well, probably in order, her male God has to be okay with it. Well, maybe in 4 or 5 if we split the deity up, right? This male Holy Ghost needs to be okay with it. Her male husband needs to be okay with it, and her male bishop needs to be okay with it. I don't know to what degree I would discuss that with my client because I would honor that. Hey, that's where she's in at right now. So I don't know that I would bring that up in a therapeutic setting, but that's what I'm noticing in a personal response.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife experienced similar messages that around making sexual decisions, right? That she had to get approval from all men. And so I would upvote this, but that's what I would say to you on the side is that unfortunately this female has to get male approval to have a healthy sexual life. I'm glad that she's getting a positive response from this male, but
yeah, it's not self-centered autonomy, right? It's outsourced.
Yeah, it's outsourced autonomy. And that's the world she lives in, so I'm going to honor that, right?
Yeah.
As a therapist, unless she says something to me that would invite wanting to explore that, I wouldn't necessarily explore that with her. I would notice that and wait until it might come up or might not. But, right, this is a very sex positive message. I'm glad that this former bishop is giving this sex positive message. I would upvote it, but yeah, it's sad that I don't know if the word's sad, but I'm just at least note that that's what she's experiencing.
Right. Yeah, I was impressed for such a progressive sex positive message from a former bishop, but you're right. There is something implicit in, a woman or really anyone. This could apply to men and women, right?
Yeah.
But needing to seek external validation for something that we enjoy that meets the expectations that our partner has of our sexual relationship with them, it is kind of sad to see that outsourcing of morality. But like you said, that is kind of part and parcel of the overall. And I wouldn't even just say the Mormon system. This is part and parcel of most religious systems. That there is this outsourced kind of question of morality.
Yeah, I like that he says if you're still feeling guilty, let's talk about counseling options to help break down traditional, overly conservative purity culture type teachings and beliefs so you can feel free to embrace your sexuality and all the wonderful divinely designed feelings and capacities that you've been endowed with. It's a great message. Great that she gets that from the bishop, but nothing above a bishop would give her that message. That's something I will note is that she's not going to get anything near that type of message from anybody above the position of bishop.
I also think statistically, most bishops probably would not give such a sex positive, healthy message. I don't have any data to support this, but I'm just guessing based on my experiences with bishops that most bishops are not going to be nearly as progressive. So I kind of wanted to end us on that highlight today, Mike. Let me pull up your slide here with your website and your resources. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this with me today. Hopefully it was fun for you, getting a little insight into the LDS Sexuality subreddit.
Yeah, it was. It's those are all type of topics that end up in my office with individuals both inside that are still consider themselves religious. I have clients that are still very religious, and I have clients that are very post, burn the church down type of thing. And it doesn't, just like I said earlier, just because you leave a system, that doesn't mean that the beliefs automatically go away.
Definitely. So tell people here about your website and resources where they can find you.
Yeah, I started to do some stuff on social media. I'm a Mike Fuller MSW on Instagram. I've got a website, Fuller Counseling Group. I'm currently accepting new clients. I'm licensed in Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and soon to be Arizona. And I actually do consulting outside of those states for just deconstructing faith and or and sex issues that I don't think are clinical to reach a requirement to be at a counseling level. And that's where people can find me.
Great.
And I have an office here in Meridian that I see clients in.
Cool. Thanks again for being part of this conversation, Mike. I had a lot of fun going through these with you. And I was honestly kind of impressed at some of the progressive messages that we saw from believing members. I think it is good that we're seeing more efforts to move towards more sex positive messaging in the church. I think that will do a lot of good for a lot of people. So it makes me happy.
Yeah. Is there like an ex-Mormon sexuality subreddit?
I'm sure there probably is, but
Yeah,
it's
maybe we
probably
can.
not safe for work.
Yeah, we might have to go to ex-Mormon and then do the search, and maybe we can get some questions off there too.
That's right. Well, folks, please thank Mike in the comments for joining us for another episode of Let's Disagree and other interesting conversations. Let us know what you thought about this conversation. If you'd like to see us explore more questions, or like Mike said, maybe take a look at the ex-Mormon sexual questions that come up from time to time. I really appreciate you taking the time, Mike. And folks, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned here on Let's Disagree for more interesting conversations in the future. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, Colby.